Bom dia, Vacordia. Hello, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, or if you're watching a recording of this chat. So welcome to another Fireside Chat. Eimear Burke here, where I'm in conversation with a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So now, as become customary, I would like to start with a prayer for peace. Gomara Shiacon ar fud na crinne. Gomara Shiacon in our Jaili agus in our Jirha. Gunairi Linda in our Garmaca. Gaumij buichas jiv, je chivdaka is spirit chivdaka. May peace prevail on earth. May peace prevail in our homes and in our countries. May our missions be accomplished. We thank you, guardian spirits and guardian deities. As the fever of day calms towards twilight, may all that is strained in us come to ease. We pray for all who suffered violence today. May an unexpected serenity surprise them. For those who risk their lives each day for peace, may their hearts glimpse providence at the heart of history. That those who make riches from war and violence might hear in their dreams the cry of the lost. That we might see through our fear of each other a new vision to heal our fatal attraction to aggression. That those who enjoy the privilege of peace might not forget their tormented brothers and sisters. That the wolf might lie down with the lamb, that our swords be beaten into plowshares, and no harm or hurt be done anywhere along the Holy Mountain, with thanks to John O'Donoghue, Irish poet and philosopher. So you're all very, very welcome. And let me see where you're all from. We've got Ulster, South London, Liverpool, Texas, Crouch End, I think that's London, Aberdeenshire, Poland, lovely to see you. Longford, great. Listening with joy after a day of bringing in the hay. That's great. We've had lovely weather here. Much cooler London, Julie. That's lovely to hear things have gotten cooler. Finland, Edinburgh, cooler again. Belgium, New Forest, South Australia. I don't know what time it is in South Australia, but Europe early. Athens, that's Athens, Georgia. Okay. Grenada in the Caribbean. Wow. Okay. Manitoba, Canada, Lincolnshire, and California North Coast. Lovely to see you all. And Ontario, Canada. So here it's dull. We had our heat wave last weekend where we reached the highest temperature since the late 1800s, which was, I think, 33.2 degrees centigrade here in Kilkenny. So we didn't quite reach that, but maybe 31 degrees, 32. So it's cooler now. It's dropped about 10 degrees and it actually feels cold. I'm wearing a cardigan where normally I wouldn't be at this temperature. Anyway, glad to hear that some other places too, it's cold or cooler, should we say. More Australians, Darwin, Northern Territory, Oregon, Winchester, New Forest, Durham, California. You're all very, very welcome. Well, let me take you to see my guest. We're going to Calgary in Canada, and I'd like to introduce OBOD member Shaun McCann. Shaun, you are so welcome to this Fireside Chat.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm a little under the weather, and the temperature is a little bit warm, so I hope folks will bear with me.
And you've tested positive for COVID, so you're managing that right now.
Yep.
Well, much appreciated that you're willing to chat.
And I tried not to come high as a kite, so I figured I'd try to have my best COVID brain about me.
Okay, so tell us, you're in Calgary. So tell us what your landscape is like.
Oh boy. If there's one thing we're known for in Alberta, other than our idiot politicians, is the landscape. In fact, a lot of people, when they come to Canada, from outside the country or even within Canada, They come to Alberta, and for good reasons. We have about 45 minutes to the west of me. We have the Rocky Mountains, and a lot of them. So Alberta has quite a foresty mountain landscape with lots of great rivers and lakes, and surprisingly great temperatures. I mean, we can go. I'm not going to turn this into a weather report, but I think one of the things that's fantastic about Calgary, because I like winter. The aesthetic is great. I love looking out at it from indoors where it's warm, and because we get the warm air over the mountains, which out here is called the Chinook. We can go from about minus 20 Celsius to plus 10 in a day. So sometimes our winters are quite mild.
Wow.
And actually, to get a little bit more into the landscape, last fall, and this connected to something, I'd made some notes to kind of offset my COVID brain. We had the opportunity, my wife and I had the opportunity to take a trip up through the mountains, further than I had ever been prior, because I'm kind of a homebody, which I guess is, not necessarily the best quality for a druid, as it were. I mean, I suspect there's a lot of us that are introverts, so that's not too surprising. But in terms of getting outdoors in nature, I don't do it nearly enough. So I figured it was a good time, and I was in the middle of doing the ovate studies, particularly, to get up and go through the mountains, and we could use a break. So we ended up driving. It's about a 4-hour drive, and there's a road that goes right up in the middle of the Rocky Mountains all the way up to Jasper. Now, everybody, when they come out here, particularly tourists, they like to go to Banff. There's a rather famous lake which is plastered all over the internet by the name of Lake Moraine, because it's like glass, sky blue glass. It's quite beautiful if you look it up, and of course all the locals and even other Canadians are probably really familiar with it. So Banff seems to be the kind of tourist spot. But I've found, at least when we took our trip in the fall, that if you really want to see the magic, keep going north. So that's what we did. And along the way, there's it's called the Icefield Parkway, if I remember right. I should be better at this. Along the way, you have the entrance to the Columbia ice fields, which I think is 100 to 200 million years old. It's enough digits where my bank account will never come close to that amount of zeros. But it's a glacier. Unfortunately, it is a decreasing glacier because of our current condition, but there's still plenty of it that remains, and I think it's about 300 or 400 feet thick. So it's quite the way down. So you can go up towards the Columbia ice field in the middle of summer, and all of a sudden it's winter, right?
Wow.
Even in our present condition, it is it's still quite the contrast when the when the mercury, as it were, drops about 10 degrees, and it's quite lovely. And it's just stunning. I think that I've been alive and seen enough things that there's not necessarily a lot of things that make me catch my breath. But after 45 years of existence on Earth, this was one of them, particularly because it was so close to home, and I had been unaware of it. And my wife has been all over the place, and I think taking the trip, or at least taking a trip was our idea, but where to take the trip was her idea.
Okay.
And I think she was stunned that I had never seen it before. And so, of course, it was immediately one of those things where you have to step and get out of the vehicle, because you're almost in another universe. It's heart-stoppingly beautiful.
Wow.
And so we ended up continuing on for several hours to go up north to Jasper. And the area around Jasper and Jasper National Park is actually what they call a dark sky preserve. So there's lots of things. I'm a city dwelling punk, and as any city dwelling or even town dwelling person knows, right? There's a lot of noise pollution, sound pollution, and light pollution, particularly. And this has actually been an area that's been designated under law. I believe it's federal law, not provincial law. As a dark sky preserve, which means that there's a limit to what you can build, what you can do, what kind of light you can have, precisely so that you can observe the stars and the natural habitat. It is stunning. So we had the good fortune while we were out there, of course, to do a couple things, and one of them, of course, is to take in stories from like First Nations creation stories, for example. We had the opportunity to explore First Nations culture and spirituality locally in Calgary prior to making the trip, and then we went up to Jasper and had the opportunity. I mean, we built it into our itinerary to do that specifically on the trip. So we got to learn a little bit about the stars from that perspective, which I think is important because it's very, very neglected, right?
Wow. So absolutely fascinating. So there's many threads. There's the Druidry I'm interested in, and you're wearing a collar, and we're interested in talking about that. And also, I just want to start with your name. Shaun McCann is an Irish name. Yet you're what, Canadian born?
Yeah. So I am very much Canadian, and I think whenever I encounter somebody who isn't Canadian, I think my Canadian notch goes up a little bit. So I tend to be quite obnoxious. When I visit folks down in the States, I tend to be quite. I mean, I've dropped my level of obnoxiousness, but I used to buy tacky souvenir style Canadian flag shirts with beavers and the Queen and all and all sorts of stuff to just get absolutely ridiculous, to get as Canadian as I could, as stereotypical as I could. And I've toned it down over the last decade or so. But just the same, I like to turn it up when I encounter folks who aren't Canadian. But yeah, I do have a very Irish name, Shaun Patrick Michael McCann, even though my first name is the anglicized version of that. But I'm not going to give my parents too much crap for that. So yeah, I'm Irish on both sides of my family. Straight Irish on my father's side of the family, and then my maternal grandmother was Irish. My maternal grandfather was Dutch.
Okay.
So coming from my father's side of the family, my dad was born in Montreal, Quebec, which obviously is very different from where I live right now. And there's a little bit of history to it, and I always had it in my head that it was a little bit darker, but it's not as dark as I remember it, though it still is pretty depressing. But in the 19th century, there was a lot of immigration from over the water. I believe you guys had a whole host of issues from famines and whatnot, and I don't know if this was the driving force for some of it. All I know is that Canada received a lot of Irish immigration about the mid 19th century. Unfortunately, travel at that point was not as luxurious as it is today, though I imagine it's still just as overpriced. And so there were a lot of people that didn't survive the crossing. And so Montreal and Quebec City, Montreal, Quebec in general, ended up with a lot of Irish orphans because parents didn't survive. Okay. And so they were adopted into French families, though they kept their Irish names. And there's actually, for anybody who's listening to this who's Canadian, if you're of an age with me, you're going to remember the commercial. There's a famous Canadian commercial which more or less tells the history of this. Now, I have to assume, I don't know because my father passed away when I was young, but I have to assume that ultimately this is the roots of our family, particularly because my dad was born in Montreal in the 40s. So I have to assume that's the case, though later on in life, he would end up moving west. For me, I was born in Ontario, Hamilton for some reason, and then I grew up in Winnipeg, Manitoba, in East Kildonan and St. Boniface areas. And you mentioned somebody was here from Manitoba, so hello. I haven't been out to Manitoba in ages, but it still feels like home, even though I've lived in Calgary for about 30 years. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just I miss the mosquitoes, but which is the mosquito is the Manitoban provincial bird.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and coleslaw is kind of the provincial food. So if you like coleslaw and if you like mosquitoes, Manitoba's the place for you. So I grew up in Winnipeg and now I live out in Calgary. But yeah, so there's lots of Irish in my family, and I believe my grandfather on my father's side was born over the water. But that's kind of the limit of my knowledge in that regard, simply because my father passed away when I was really young, and and therein arose a kind of dispute between the rest of the family as to what was going to happen with me, and my mom and her dad, my grandpa, they pretty much were determined to make sure I stayed put where I was. But so I was baptized Catholic growing up. Despite the collar, I'm not a Catholic. I am, however, a priest. That's worthy of some mention. But yeah, I was baptized Catholic, and I was raised in a Dutch Protestant church because that's the church that my grandpa, who was Dutch, was familiar with. So the Christian Reformed denomination, which is Calvinist, and very, very strict and stodgy and kind of bleak, actually, to be honest. Not a very nice theology, though I'll tell you the community was always nice. I did end up leaving it firmly in my teens simply because, as you grow older and you begin to understand the stuff that you hear on Sunday or in catechism class, and you begin to kind of grok or take in some of the issues that you're discussing, then it becomes apparent, okay, once you get past the Sunday school stories and you get to the actual boots on the ground, how are you translating this into action? The way they translated it wasn't very nice. Women couldn't be ministers. They didn't like gays all that much. And I mean, heck, I'm not even sure they like dancing, right? I mean, I don't like dancing, but it's only because I can't do it.
Okay.
So I decided that obviously the idea of spirituality and the divine, and even Christ was something that I was very, very comfortable with, but the rest of it was just a bunch of bull. And so, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. So what church are you in now, or what?
So currently, and for the past 20 some years, I've been involved with the Apostolic Johannite Church. That's a mouthful. Johannite as in John, as in the Apostle John. So if you think about the Roman Catholic Church, and its focus on Saint Peter, you can think about us in terms of John, the beloved disciple, the Apostle John. But we're also big fans of John the Baptist, and so we're an esoteric focused, mystically focused, ultra inclusive, Gnostic Christian church. So, and even though we have Christian in our descriptor, we have plenty of folks who are not Christian, explicitly not Christian, as members and even leaders within our community. Right? We utilize the 7 sacraments. We make use of Christian language, and of course, some of the familiar forms of Christian liturgy and ritual. However, when it comes down to the personages of the Trinity as such, or the nature of Jesus versus, say, Christ, that's a matter of individual conscience. We don't tell people what to decide. The fact of the matter is in order to gather people, much in the same way that OBOD has frameworks for its ritual to kind of enable people to speak and hear in the same language, to frame their experience. We do likewise with our rituals. So we maintain the 7 sacraments: baptism, confirmation, reconciliation, the Eucharist, but the ultimate decision on how to interpret those, on how to make use of them, how to carry them out in the world, we leave up to the individual, right?
And transubstantiation, you talk about celebrating the Eucharist.
Yeah, we don't we don't tell people what to believe when it comes to the Eucharist. Is it our view that something happens, right, when that ritual is undertaken, when something goes from being one thing to the other? Absolutely. But I'd have to say, if we were to adopt anybody's language formally, and we don't have formal language about it, we'd probably be a lot closer to the Anglican real presence, right?
Okay,
I think the Anglicans and the Eastern Orthodox have it right when they don't attempt to legalize or fine-grain the mystery, right? You create a space where the mystery can occur. You invite people to participate in it, and you invite them to digest that experience on their own terms, right? And there's no such thing as a heretic in a heretic church. I mean, we're a fringe of a fringe, right? So, we recognize that certain experiences reliably create a space where spiritual experience can happen, and we invite people into it. But how they reconcile that, is on their own terms. Now, I mentioned we're Gnostic. That has a historical.
So, can you just for our viewers to explain what a Gnostic church is?
Absolutely. So Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge, but it's not knowledge like book knowledge. It's kind of experiential or relational knowledge. So there's a difference between me saying, for example, I know mathematics versus I know Kim, my wife. One is relational, experiential. The other is information, right?
Okay.
And so gnosis essentially refers to the experiential reality of the divine, the direct experience of the divine. I would frame it as a kind of subjective experience of objective spiritual truth, right? I mean, we're participating in the same reality, but it's always mediated through subjective experience. It's always understood within the context of your own head, with the context of your own life and where you live. So it's very, very relational. I mean, I think early proponents of it might describe it as a kind of acquaintanceship, as it were, right? So Gnosticism as an actual religion was essentially a philosophy or religion that had its origins in kind of cosmopolitan pre-Christian Alexandria, where you have a melting pot of obviously things like Roman paganism, like classical paganism, Hellenized Judaism, that type of thing. But it only really kind of got its prominence or took its form in the sense that we know it, in having definition and practice, I would say probably within the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, so-called, right? And then pretty much that's when it kind of takes the form as we know it, fundamentally as a Christian heresy. And the thing that separates out a Gnostic church from another church is, of course, is that we view gnosis, that experiential knowledge of the divine, as being necessary for salvation. It isn't, oh, I've accepted Jesus into my heart, or oh, I've paid my tithe, or oh, I've magically transformed myself into a nice person 5 minutes before I walk into this church, but I'm a jerk every other day of the week, right? It's an actual, it's an experiential thing, and that thing lies between you and the divine alone. There isn't a right. The rights we have are designed to facilitate that experience. They don't give it to you, right? There's nothing that says you need to come to this church, you need to do this right, you need to be initiated in this fashion, or else you'll be damned. There's nothing there that requires it. And as for damnation, I can, while we don't have a doctrinal position on it, I would wager that most folks in the AJC don't believe in hell either. So
of certain heretics. Philippa has a question. Is it like the Knights Templar?
Well, certainly Gnosticism has been linked to things like the Templars, right? And I mean, some of that kind of enters the mythology of our own church, because every esoteric group, esoteric order, modern mystical anything usually has a type of what they call a traditional history, or an esoteric history, from the dawn of time or the mists of time, that kind of thing, a narrative, right? And certainly in terms of the Johannite Church, there is a linked narrative to Gnostics and Johannites. And one of the predecessor organizations that we're lineally descended from comes from a Johannite church located in Napoleonic France around the time about 1804, 1805. A French doctor by the name of Bernard Raymond Fabre-Pelleprat, who refounded a Knights Templar order and a Johannite church, the idea of an esoteric Church of John. And the mythology there is that essentially the the Gnostic church or the early Johannite church, and they see them as more or less the same. I wouldn't. But that essentially it survived persecution by going underground, traveling through the Middle Ages into the hands of the Knights Templar, who protected it, ended up sheltering it during their own persecution and eradication, only to pop up mystically and magically in 19th century France, to come back to the present day. So in terms of having that connection, there is that there, but it's a myth, right? I mean, there's a different
story.
Yeah, it's a story, and I mean stories. I mean, we're all here because we're members of, or we're interested in OBOD. So anybody who has spent time with the Bardic material, or even just listening to any of these chats or the teas, I mean, story is a pretty big deal, right? It helps you organize and sort and express your principles. Myth can tell you something that is true without having to be factual, right? The sun is 93 million miles away is a fact. That it'll rise tomorrow is true. Those two things are aligned but different, right? So myth gives you ideas about who you are or who you can be, but it's not necessarily fact. So we try to we put it in perspective, and we acknowledge, we say, this is a myth. The story is designed to enable you to be better people in the world. It's not designed to replace who you are. It's not designed to be taken as fact. I mean, to ramble a little bit about myth, I mean, you look, for example, one of the things that's covered by OBOD so well, is the story of Taliesin, for example, right? I don't think anybody's suggesting there was a literal foot race at some point in some time between a terrifying goddess and a very scared kid. Transforming and going through lakes and rivers and into different animals and plants. However, at the same time, there's something there that tells us something true about ourselves. I mean, to use a secular example, in therapy, right? I mean, they have you externalize your problems so that I'm not the problem. To use an example, use the example of alcohol. I'm not the problem. The booze is not the problem. It's my relationship with the problem that is the problem. So when you take something, you put it outside of yourself as an objective object, you can learn you can learn about it a little bit more. You can learn about its relationship a little bit more with kind of objective or thinking mind eyes, and then you can reintegrate it in a way that can either heal you or make you a better person. Storytelling as initiation does this.
Yeah, and I mean, someone says, "Is it? Are they true?" And it's like, yes, there are truths in stories. It's almost like, well, whether it happened or not isn't the issue. It's the truth of the story, or the truth that can be found in the narrative is what's important.
Absolutely. There's a great quote, and it comes from some of the letters. I'm a great lover of historical stuff, and particularly esoteric stuff. And there were letters that were exchanged by early members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and somebody was writing a letter to somebody else about the so-called secret chiefs, the hidden masters, that type of crap, right? Not necessarily ascended masters, but pretty bloody close. And something to the effect about whether or not these beings, whether or not these inner beings, or higher level beings were real or not. And there was a quote in reply that struck me that said, whether or not they exist is secondary to the fact that the universe behaves as if they do. And so, and I think we can, and there are lots of people, particularly when dealing with magic or mysticism of the occult, that come down to different ideas. Are spirits real? Are they in your head? What are they? And I think what they are, we don't necessarily need to know, but we can treat them as real to achieve a certain particular effect. You can either, if they're in you, then you have the opportunity to learn more about yourself. If they're external to you, you have the opportunity to learn more about the world. If they're somewhere in between, fantastic. You have a real opportunity to learn a little bit about everything, right?
Yeah, Pat talks about the notion of myth, true but not factual, Somebody says true versus literal.
Mm-hmm.
And then Owen de Vardun, who's a storyteller, couldn't agree more. There's a truth in every tale. And then Tina said, "This is really one day we'll all be myths. Let's hope." This is up to make sure that we have good narratives to pass on. Poppy is Greek. She lives in Crete, and she says another meaning of gnosis is to recognize, which is a really interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
Gnosis mean to recognize as well as knowledge, and there's something around when you talk about personal gnosis, that personal recognition.
Mm-hmm.
I like that notion as well, recognizing.
Well, there's a certain quality, and we've said it, as Gnostics. I mean, we've said it of ourselves, and I've heard, my fellow OBODs. I love that term. I've heard OBODs use the term as well. The idea that when they encounter, the path, as it were, and I'll just use that just as a general phrase to kind of the spiritual path for the individual. When they encounter the path, it's not a conversion experience, it's a recognition experience, right? Finally, you have a name. You have a name for the thing you didn't know there was a name for, right? Yes. It's that sense of homecoming, right? Or having existed previously in exile. So there is a quality of recognition there when kind of the tumblers in the lock of the universe kind of roll into place.
Yeah. And Eric says, and I agree with you, Gnostic and Jung, I don't need to believe, I know. Yeah. And that just makes so much sense to me. It's about not what I believe, but what I know.
Yeah. Jung was big on Gnosticism, particularly because he viewed Gnosticism, at least as I understand it, particularly when you look at his Gnostic explorations, which kind of dovetail with his alchemical explorations, as almost a kind of primitive psychology kind of thing. Like he tended to tie in and view, Gnosticism, magic, and alchemy as kind of the psychological process of individuation without having those terms, right? What their version of what we do today 2,000 years ago.
Say that again.
It would essentially be a primitive form of psychology or reunification, individuation, without the science of psychology. Essentially, that's what you viewed the Gnostics as trying to do, was a version of individuation, as I understand it. I know a lot more about Gnosticism than I do about Jung.
So, what brings you? I take it you were obviously a member of the Johannite Church long before you joined OBOD. So,
yeah,
what was that journey from your church? You're a reverend? Are you a bishop? What are you?
I'm a priest. I mean, that's the kind of when people ask me what I do, and obviously I wear a collar. I just tell them I'm a priest, but I actually lead the organization. So I'm its presiding bishop, which is a little bit funny because I'm not that old. I'm in my mid-40s. And I've been a priest for 20 years, going on 21. And the church was a lot smaller. I mean, we're already, pretty small. I mean, most of our groups are 5 to 20 people, and small groups. I mean, we avoid meeting in homes for a lot of specific reasons, because I mean, who wants to go over to somebody's house? So we meet in churches, and we do things in a very
do you have your own building, or do you use other churches?
Well, here locally we rent, but we do have folks that have more permanent spaces, though I don't think anybody owns their stuff, because Gnostics, well, and esoteric folks generally, and pretty much everybody as the world continues, is generally pretty broke. So
yeah.
Yeah, right. I mean, who's got the kind of money for real estate?
Poor Gnostics. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, you look at any kind of esoteric thing, and it's generally a bunch of broke folks trying to get rich. We're not those folks, but the history of magic is all about getting rich. I mean, making gold. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
But so I've served as a priest for 20 years, and I also lead the organization, and that's because the person before me retired about 3 years into their role in their previous life. And a lot of our folks, clergy and laity alike, are spiritual wanderers, right? I mean, they've gotten involved in a little bit of everything. I mean, we're not hard, fast, and dogmatic. So we have members who are members of OBOD. We have members who are Wiccans. We have members who are Buddhists, and we have members who are Christian, right? So my predecessor, prior to his conversion experience to Christianity, was a Buddhist. Specifically, he had done the 3-year retreat in Tibetan Buddhism, Vajrayana, to become a Tibetan Buddhist monk. But he decided that celibacy wasn't his bag, so he ended up returning his vows. And while he was going to school and studying comparative religion, he had if I remember right, he had a Dominican priest for a teacher at some point. And his conversion experience, at least as I remember it, involved celebrating the Eucharist out in nature on a rock. So there was a large rock that was used as an altar, and he said the experience of seeing that with the local Dominican community was the thing that kind of got him to jump ship to Christianity. So, however, we've already established that he wasn't really big on celibacy.
So he wasn't going to be Nazi.
So
okay.
he wasn't going to do the Rome thing, and so that's when he discovered the independent sacramental movement, which has lots of overlaps with modern Druidry. So the independent sacramental movement are tiny Christian churches, some Catholic, some Orthodox, some wildly heterodox like ourselves, who exist, have lineage of ordination, practice the sacraments, but don't fall under a larger church like, say, Constantinople, Canterbury, or Rome. So this makes for a lot of liturgical and doctrinal freedom. It also makes it a home for whack jobs, con artists, and cults of personality. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. You can get a lot of good stuff, and you can get a lot of stuff that you wouldn't take home to mom. So he discovered that, and so he ended up going the route to be ordained in that, and so he started the AJC on that basis as a bishop. Now there's a story that says we're connected to this, and the secret heirs of that or whatever, but I've never seen any evidence of that. I don't believe it. I know that lineally, in terms of ordination, so and so laid hands on so and so to so and so, blah 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 blah. We connect all of that. That's easily historically verifiable. Whether or not Faber Palaprat's church continued in secret operation for 200 years to the present day, that can't be verified. I mean, I'm considered one of the folks who know about that particular organization, and it doesn't go past 1870, right? So it's likely that just individual bishops were ordaining or consecrating individual bishops, and then at some point somebody said, well, I'm going to make use of this because this has been essentially sitting dormant on a shelf. So somebody decided to make specific use, I guess, of that genre or that type or focus for a church, and that's how we were born. So fast forward to about 2003. I'd already been a priest for a couple of years, and there was a local Buddhist group setting up in the neighborhood of where my predecessor lived, and it generated some feelings of homesickness. He decided to go pop his head in and say, hey, would you like some help setting up? I used to do this. And that type of thing, I don't know. I mean, this is what happens when people get older. They have the fondness for the thing of yesteryear, usually with rosy glasses. And I love Buddhists. This has nothing to do with Buddhists. I'm just making a crack at my predecessor's expense because I get to do that. So so he felt the call to return to connecting with them. He felt the call to return to Buddhism. So at that point in time, I think we had three groups. We had 2 groups in the United States, and we had 1 group here, which was the one that I had started. And he said, I am going to retire. I'm going to get out of it. interested in returning to Buddhism. And so at that point, I had a choice. Do I let this? This wasn't what I signed up for. Or it's certainly not the route I expected to go.
I understand that one.
Yeah, I imagine but what do I do? But the path is the path. Scaling it is an entirely different story. But the path is the path, and vows are vows. And so I had the opportunity to walk away from it and just be an individual priest, or I had the opportunity to continue the community and try and do something with it. And I think partly spurred on by the fact that I was surprised that he would take the step of leaving, but also with the sense that it took me so long to find a particular spiritual home and a practice that I was comfortable with, that if I close that door because it might be too hard, or it might be unknown or uncomfortable, or any number of things, how many other people out there are in a similar boat where they're looking for a place to feel welcome, or to be accepted, or to fit in? And if I walk away from it, who do I close that door on? And if it's 100 people, am I going to feel good about that? If it's only one person, am I going to feel good about it? Well, if I was that one person, I'd feel pretty crappy. So I decided, let's do it. So yeah, at 26 years old, I grabbed the wheel, and we went from there. And we now have 24 groups in 3 or 4 countries. I mean, like I said, all of our groups are small. We've been subjected to a few academic studies and media interviews and all sorts of other things over the years, because we are, in our own category, a little bit of an anomaly, because most indie churches don't last that long. They usually schism, or somebody goes to jail, or any number of things. And so that's where I got here. Now, how did I get to Druidry? Well, I had always, I'm esoterically inclined. That's something that obviously I wouldn't have gotten involved in a heretic church, if I was on the Christian straight and narrow, as they might say. So I wanted an esoteric church, particularly because I was esoterically inclined. And in my teens, I looked at a lot of things. I looked at Wicca and witchcraft, and runes and the Kabbalah and all that kind of stuff, and dip my toes into each one of them. But my identity was still fundamentally Christian. But one thing I did come across in the early days of the internet, of course, was OBOD, because OBOD's been around forever, twice as long as we have. And I thought, and I was really interested to do it because to take that exploration, particularly because I was interested in the mythology, in that kind of twilight universe, that kind of liminal, where there's this very embrace of the twilight and the liminal within OBOD, that kind of thing that it's hard to put human words on the not human, and I expect all the listeners will know exactly what I mean. And so I was very interested in a community that had that sense of things, as kind of one of its core explorations. But I never took the plunge. And once I pursued my vocation, well, then it was kind of off, and then you got to worry about incorporation and legal bills, and doing the stuff that you actually signed up to do, like visiting sick people and all that stuff. When you take over the business end, the administration can sometimes kill the spirituality. So that can be, and folks who are if folks who are leaders of groves or seed groups, don't let that happen to you. Be mindful of your own balance and your path. Sometimes the business stuff can be mind-numbing. But so once the vocation took over, including the paperwork, but also the nitty-gritty stuff, then it was on its way. And so we've managed to grow and expand and kind of widen our circle, and also our worldview. And, it's only been now in the last 6-7 years where, because now there's I have a really good team on board where I could stop and take a breather for myself and say, okay, I don't have to personally run this thing every day. I don't have to dot every I or cross every T myself. I now have the time to engage my own spirituality a little bit more. And so we actually have some of our clergy who are longtime OBOD members. One of our bishops, Bishop Weaver in Colorado, has been a long-time OBOD member, and he was telling me about his journey. He said, you'd really like it. And I said, well, I looked at it years ago, and but I never took the plunge. And so I decided, I think it was 2015, 2016. So yeah, 6-7 years ago, I decided to take the plunge. And one of the better spiritual decisions I've made.
Oh, wonderful. So just to get back to, do you have women bishops and women priests in your church?
We have women in the clergy. We don't have we have women in the diaconate. We currently do not have a woman as priest yet, but that's coming right around the corner.
Okay, that's not policy. It's just
no. It's just a matter. I mean, overwhelmingly, the idea of being a priest, due to the nature of society and history, and some people just being dicks, pardon my language, is that priest is still largely seen, as a male vocation, and getting that out of the language, getting that out of the mindset, is a little bit of a fight. I mean, we've been inclusive and open for both clergy and laity right since the start. Right, but getting people to take the plunge is an entirely different matter, and we've overwhelmingly had a lot more applicants to our seminary who are male than otherwise.
Okay.
Right. So, however, that said, we do have several women who are in the clergy, deacons, subdeacons, and I'm confident that folks are going to make priest before too long. Specifically, I have a local assistant, Deacon Angie, who is fantastic, and I'm looking forward to. She's not too far away from priesthood, and because I'm the boss and I get to pick and choose things, I'm fully planning on doing that myself when the time comes. Because she's going to do a lot better job than I ever did. She's fantastic.
Okay, so. Anyway, you came to. So, how do you combine your Druidry with your ministry?
Good question. Well, it's more with my spiritual worldview than my ministry, because even though we're non-dogmatic, we are fairly orthopraxic. So we do have set rituals and things that are done with particular times. That said, we do have a lot of overlap in Celtic. There's some Celtic saints among our heretic saints on our calendar. So a lot of the Druidry comes in terms of my personal worldview, and this is where, and I'm speaking personally, I'm not speaking from my community, because some people hear the boss say something, and then all of a sudden they think it's the law, and that's I imagine you get that. But for me, and I know there are Christians out there, for example, who are more animist in worldview. The idea that everything possesses its own spirit or divine connection. For me, I'm what theology would term a pan-entheist. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of related. Kind of sounds similar to pantheist, where from pan and theos, or all divine, or all is God. Pan-entheism would be all in God, as it were, or pan-entheos, to get into my very rough Greek version of it. The idea essentially that the universe is contained within the fullness of God, but God itself is bigger yet still, right? So there's better language for it. I wish I had written it down. But essentially that the universe as we know it exists within God. God still transcends that. There's still something that is transcendent, but God being in the universe, there's also an immanent quality. And so for me, when I encounter the world, particularly when I encounter nature, there's something of the divine there to be seen. And I know there's going to be folks who are saying, well, aren't Gnostics a bunch of world-hating dualists who don't like nature or material existence? That's not accurate. One of the things that Gnosticism in the modern day has suffered from is ancient critique that doesn't go away. And Druidry has a little bit of the same thing, right? Because ancient Druids, were an oral tradition, right? And so a lot of the documentation we have about them are written by the people who killed them off.
That's right. Yeah.
Or their critics. And you don't necessarily want to reconstruct a thing from people who have a particular agenda. And at the time, Christianity framed Gnosticism as being dualist and being world hating and all sorts of stuff. And to that, I can only say, have you looked at Christianity lately? Because if ever there were folks that were uncomfortable in their own bodies, there's a lot of mainstream Christians, who have a theology precisely like that. There's a lot who don't. I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush. After all, I'm one of the others, as it were. But for us, the idea of a dualism or being world hating is that there's a difference between reality and the system. The system is the thing that we impose upon it, right? It's reality is morning versus night. The system is a 9 a.m. meeting versus, a 5 o'clock commute. Those are artificial things that we've superimposed upon it, and and often enough those become obstacles in our way. I mean, when you look at the state of the environment and industrialization, technology, and all that other kind of stuff, I think there's a thing there that I think Druids can empathize with readily in terms of the system imposing on reality, right? And so that's where I see that thing now. Theologically, panentheism, I've always thought, actually was best explained not by a heretic, but actually by an Orthodox writer. There was a Greek Orthodox, or at least under the Ecumenical Patriarch at the time. And this is going back, and not all of these terms necessarily apply. This is going back 700-800 years. There was this Orthodox saint by the name of Gregory Palamas, who essentially believed that humanity was capable of achieving something called theosis, becoming divine. And however, this clashed with orthodoxy of the day, because there's a belief that there's an absolute separation between God and humanity. No one can know God directly and survive. God cannot be known in God's essence, was the problem. And he said, well, there's actually a difference, right? We cannot know God in God's essence, but we can know God by God's energies. Now, when I say energies, it sounds like I'm about to, start throwing around quartz crystals and whatnot, somewhere in Arizona, but that's not what I'm talking about. The energies comes from the Greek energeia, which means activity or work. So in other words, what Palamas was saying is we know God by what God does, through God's interaction in the world. For example, if I were to know the sun directly, I would be vaporized instantly. There's no way I can know the sun experientially, firsthand, face to face, and live. However, I can stand outside, I can feel the warmth of the sun on my neck, on my arms, on my shiny bald head, and I can have an idea, I can have an experiential knowledge of the sun by the same thing. So I can know the sun, by what it does. And so therefore, even though we cannot know God in God's essence, we can know God in God's energies or God's activity. And the natural extension of that theology is panentheism, the idea that because God's activity is the universe, that the divine is seated in everything that is, and that includes nature. And so nature, by extension, is itself divine. So so for me, I've found where my spirituality meets the world or meets nature is I tend to treat it in that respect. And and I'm using gendered terms for convenience, so forgive me, but I tend to treat nature as an elder sister or elder sibling, right? That the divine is reflected therein, and as a part of that acquaintanceship, that gnosis, that recognition that there is something that I can learn of myself, of the divine, and of it in its reflection, in interaction. And I think that's kind of, important. I think it's important to come into contact with the divine within ourselves. I mean, that is the key to the spiritual path. However, there's lots of times where I roll out of bed, I look in the mirror, I'm brushing my teeth, and is that a zit? Is my hair turning gray? You know what I mean? I got to go to work, all these other kind of things. Sometimes seeing the divine in the face that looks back at me in the mirror can be a pretty challenging thing.
Mm-hmm.
And for any of our fellows who have read the news lately, or interacted with anybody in the public square or politics or any of those kind of things, sometimes seeing the divine in our fellow human beings can be a challenge.
Absolutely.
So if we can't readily see the divine sometimes in ourselves because we get in our own way, and we can't readily see it at all times in other human beings because we get in our own way, or, to be honest, sometimes they get in ours, right? Where is it that we can encounter the divine free of the things that we put upon it, free of the system, as it were? Nature is one of those places. So that's kind of where my Christianity and my Gnosticism has met my Druidry. That was a long, windy answer. Sorry for that, but I hope that helped.
Okay, and are you a member of a grove? Like, do you follow
the
year? Do you follow the wheel of the year?
I try to. Yep. I mean, typically a lot of those things overlap with particular saint days or feast cycles in Christianity. That's not a coincidence. For example, we've got Lammas coming around the corner, and that's something that's common to pagans and Christians alike. You have things like St. Bridget's Day and Imbolc, for example, that go hand in hand. So there's a lot of things where, from the practice of my vocation, I'm coming first from the perspective of vocation, but I always do my best to give a nod in that direction when I do. In terms of a local grove, we do have a grove out here. I believe it's the Chinook Hills Grove. I try to pay attention to what's going on around me. I have not had the chance to meet them, though I have parishioners in our local community who have. And they say they're fantastic. They've gone walking with them. And so I've kind of, resolved to join folks for a walk. But in my secular work, I work in healthcare. So between healthcare and vocation, and also, trying to, convince my wife not to leave me for being too busy, my time tends to be, pretty full. So I haven't had the opportunity to do it yet, but I do realize that there is a good active grove out here, and I watched them not too long ago because they were one of the. I've been able to catch the stuff online, and I was able to watch them. It was fantastic.
And Jane Myatt, who's a member, she was a guest of mine, an earlier Fireside Chat guest, who lives in Calgary. Yeah.
I've heard. I've watched them in action from that perspective, and I loved it. And like I said, folks in our local community have participated, and they said folks were great. So I'm hoping to bring those two worlds together in a more direct way. Yeah, it's funny. There is a group in the city, but I've just kind of been holed up just simply because, well, there's a lot on the plate, right?
So you work in healthcare. So just tell us a little bit about that, because you're really busy.
Yeah, that's well, and it's been especially fun the last couple of years. Nothing fancy. I am a bureaucrat. I am a desk jockey, a pencil pusher, a number cruncher, that kind of thing. I work in nutrition as a dietary clerk at one of our larger hospitals, and that generally involves making sure that people don't get things they're allergic to or they're going to choke on. So generally involves checking, rechecking, and some planning out of dietary stuff for particular patients. That's also included, of course, things for, as we've seen throughout COVID, there's been a lot of folks who have ended up hospitalized or intubated in ICU. So that also includes a little bit of that end in terms of calculating the kind of, liquid nutrition you get when you're not conscious and you can't eat physically. So in terms of stuff, it hasn't been numbers on a page. It's been names and ages and some really difficult circumstances where the the desk job, there's been a couple of days where it's felt pretty visceral, right? But yeah, so I've been doing that for about 15 years, and it happens to dovetail nicely with the vocation because I carry a bag with my stuff in it, and from time to time, from various overlaps in my worlds, there are people who end up in hospital. So it's just a matter of simply, okay, so I'm just going to excuse myself from my desk and head upstairs, and I've done that more times than I can count, right? And so that has been really good, and all my coworkers and managers know what I do, because occasionally I get people pulling me aside because they want an ear, right? And so it's been good to have not only esoteric or spiritual interests that kind of dovetail with each other, but also secular work that allows for the opportunity to make a bit of a difference.
Wow. And you're a poet, aren't you?
Not a very good one. But I write like I talk, and you guys have been listening to me for the last hour, so you can only imagine what it looks like in writing.
Anyone want to hear a poem? I mean, where do you get your imas from, or your aban from for your poetry?
That's hard to say. I'm a great fan of music. I've been playing guitar for a couple decades, though I'm not as good as I should be for the amount of time I've had involved. It's simply because of time and the world. But I found that writing, particularly poetry, or any type of spiritual writing, is a lot like music. And there was a great quote from Robert Smith of The Cure. You can tell definitely when I when I grew up. I mean, I played in a punk band in my teens, and punk and metal and all that stuff. And if you like The Cure, you've got good taste. Robert Smith in an interview once said that making music was kind of, there's an element to it that's kind of, and this is a paraphrase, kind of like trying to shine coal into a diamond. It can't happen. It either comes out fully formed, as it were, or not at all. No amount of pushing on it is necessarily going to make it work. So it needs to come out or not. And so I find that the writing process, whether music or poetry, tends to be the same way, that sometimes it catches and it's a wildfire, and other times I couldn't rub two sticks together for a spark to keep me from freezing to death. So it really comes and goes. I wish I knew, because I would tap into it more. And I do know that environment makes a difference, if that makes sense. There are settings that are more conducive.
So, which are more conducive? I mean, do you go out into nature, or can you sit in front of your notebook or in front of your screen and do it?
A little bit of both. I mean, I'm a fan of all things Twilight, of all things liminal, and I find those things that are neither one thing or the other, tends to create that there's a space where you can make the higher and the lower match, the inner and the outer, where you find that kind of alignment and things just click. And so I find that dawn, dusk, those type of things, I find those things a little bit more conducive to creating that space inside my head. I mean, water takes the shape of its container, so I try to place myself in such a cup as to generate that feeling, I guess.
Brilliant. So there are a few people who would like to hear some of your poetry.
Well, then you get what you deserve. Sorry, I mean that in a nice way. My stuff isn't that great, but if you're asking for it, well, it's your own fault. Well, I've got two pieces here, and one was written because it was we were just in the first kind of gasps for no pun intended, gasps of COVID, and obviously there were a lot of anxiety within within our work community, within spiritual community, and just out in the world, lots of anxiety. and kind of what do we do next? Where do we go next? So one was kind of written with that in mind as I kind of worked up that process for myself. And the other, honestly, was just I was on my commute to work in the middle of the fall, and oh, I love fall. Had I the power, were I the tyrant of the universe, it would be fall year round.
Okay.
And I mean, I like spring because it also has that kind of in between kind of thing, leaning towards growth. But fall has that in between thing with a hint towards the decline that is just enough to remind you of your own mortality, just enough to place things into focus, while at the same time still being a time of harvest and beauty. It's a reminder of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was actually on my commute when I wrote it, and I couldn't tell you about my mindset, but it was definitely within the fall. So I think I'll start with that one. Yeah, these tend to be more rambles than poetry. And I'm really bad at naming things. So this one I just called October because it was October. Funny that. Okay. The cold wind blows steadily upon the embers of a timeless sense of time. The tint and the hues of the leaves in a whirling repose, seeds nestled in a now chilling earth, like Bran facing the darkness of an unknown future, or a King Arthur slumbering against some future day. St. John sleeps in his tomb, breath dust of suspended animation moving up and down with each passing moment. Gray clouds are pierced only by the rays of an increasingly unreturning sun. Its stay shortened from day to day. In between the rows of trees and stones, the shuffle of feet from 1,000 moving people, held hypnotized in the distracting rapture of immediate concern, is the superimposition of the ghosts, a silent cacophony of hopes and regrets from generations departed, weaving their way in and out of the glancing periphery of the longing of the living. Quietly and just beyond the sight of the horizon lies the shades of our future, the ghosts yet to be, looking back on a not yet to be mourned time which has not come to pass. A waltz of memory, moment, and ultimacy, timed out to a rhythm played by none, but experienced by all. The candles come to light and the fog of darkness rolls away in the presence of the bright blade of flame, whose name is eternity, each one its own effigy of those whose names are known to us alone. The monuments of cross and sprig and column call our hearts upward and onward, while the gravity of the body pulls us down and plants us in the body of the world, stretching us between the past and the future, the height and the depth, the inner and the outer. The thinning of the veil, the soft barrier which keeps 100 worlds at bay, makes its strategic retreat for some small victory of meaning against the chaos of the finite.
Wow. Beautiful.
Thank you. I'm not a very good reader of things. I typically work better with, prayer books.
I thought you read it very well. Sean Clancy says, fantastic. Not a ramble at all, but a lyrical commentary on transition. So inspiring.
Thank you.
Jay Gardner says, sounds nice to me, fella. So, very nice. Wonderful. Okay, how about your second one? Or will we leave it? Will we go on a little bit talking and then have another one? Have another one after?
Entirely up to you. Okay.
Now you wrote an article on Druidry and Christianity, didn't you?
I did. Yep.
And that's on the website for anyone interested in it. What's the title of it?
I don't think it's up yet. I'm not sure because I think there was a mention maybe by Maria at the time that they were working through some web bugs. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's been up, but it's supposed to go up at some point. It's called The Voice of the Divine, and it's kind of about the relationship of Christianity and nature and Druidry, both from spiritual perspective and also a little bit of a historical overlap.
Great. Anyway, so watch the space. So people, I found myself there. That was very beautiful. Loved it. Thank you, beautiful. We want to hear more. I closed my eyes and I went away. So anyway, you're getting lots of positive comments here
No, it's awfully kind of folks. Thank you.
to your piece. So would you say there's been a time in your life that Druidry has supported you specifically? I mean, I know obviously your own Christian spiritual, your Gnostic spiritual beliefs have. Has there been anything that's been particularly Druidic that has supported you?
Oh, absolutely.
So
This is and this was, I think this was a surprise to me. You know, and I shouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, you know, because the events themselves were a surprise, you know, that chances are, you know, the surprising rises to the surprising. You know, I mean, we're ordinary people trying to do and encounter the extraordinary, but sometimes the extraordinary meets the extraordinary, and usually comes from extraordinary places. And there was a point, particularly in the last year or two, particularly during the pandemic, where I think not just Druidry, but specifically OBOD was of inestimable value, because you know, in addition to the you know, the stress of healthcare stuff, and of course, you know, trying to manage a denomination and whatnot, and you know, funny, none of this was because of COVID, but that it came during COVID made it a lot more difficult. Last couple of years, I've lost a handful of family members.
okay.
You know, my dad, my stepdad. I mentioned my father died when I was very young, but I grew up. I grew up with a stepdad named Andy, and you know, and I mean, as you know, dads and kids are, and you know, there's a certain kind of male whatever at times that I think guys need to get over when it comes to working with emotion, particularly with, you know, father figures. I mean, we didn't necessarily talk long and deep, but there was always a thing over the last 30 years where there was that, you know, understanding that gets conveyed without words, and Andy was, you know, there in my life through a lot of, you know, very significant moments, and he passed suddenly, you know, went from 100 to 0 very, very quick. And 2 weeks after that, my uncle. And prior to Andy, my wife lost her dad, and so, and also one of our clergy, one of our female clergy, passed away due to cancer. You know, I also had a friend whose suicide I didn't see coming, and that one hit particularly hard because as clergy you spend time training and doing stuff, particularly with you know, with intervention, with pastoral care, with suicidality and depression, anxiety, and whatnot. And you know, and he and I were always you know, very close. Our schedules kept us apart, but you know, when we spent the time together, our conversations were always very, 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 very deep and transformative. And he had been struggling, and I had no idea. And he had moved actually out to the east, out east, the year before. And I'm not sure if the distance contributed to my lack of awareness, but it was a blind side. So having all these things happen one after the other, you know, I'm not in danger of having my faith shaken. You know, it's just one of those things. It's there. It's a landmark. It's immovable. So it's never been a thing where, you know, I'm never going to look to the heavens and go, why God, why, or any of that other kind of stuff. It's the nature. It's what happens when you exist in a universe with physics, right?
Yeah.
You know, why does God do bad things to good people? It's what happens, right? It has very little to do with the divine. So that said, you know, my ability, you know, the divine doesn't change and the world doesn't change, but you get stretched out in between the two things, and you need to be able to reconcile them and connect them digest them and transmute them, right? The world is always, from an alchemical standpoint, there is no shortage of lead. There's no shortage. Life will give you lead. It will dump it on your front doorstep. You can either transmute it, or you can be poisoned by it. You can be buried by it, right? It'll seep into your groundwater. You will become bitter, and it will kill everything you touch. And so you can transmute it or die. That's literally that's the choice you have. And alchemically, gold is only ever made from lead. So you're not going to make gold from silver, right? So for me, these what felt like personal hits were coming one after the other, and that happened at the time specifically that I was working through the ovate material.
Okay.
And for folks who've spent some time with the ovate material, you'll see where they connect immediately. And for folks who aren't there yet, you got a great ride in front of you. I'm envious. and I do return to it. And so for me, encountering those things that specifically touch on ancestry, that specifically touch on, for example, not only the family of blood, but the family you choose, right? And I think in the Gwersi, if Philip was the author of these ones, I think he used the term, milk line in distinction to bloodline, though I'm sure it didn't originate there. So dealing with ancestry, dealing with connections of community, of person to person, person to nature, person to self. I mean, it's kind of like the old English thing that there are 3 types of stories: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus self. And in narrative things, that's generally what you encounter. And I was encountering a little bit of all of that, conveniently overlapping with my time in the ovate grade. So it seemed to, and I had put it down, actually. I had been dragging butt on it for about a year, maybe a year and a half prior. And it's just, I'll return to it. I'll do these things, and all these things started happening. Mm-hmm. And so I renewed and I revisited, the material, and the world gave me lead, and the OBOD material gave me a laboratory.
Wow, what a lovely way of putting that.
And so, so I began, so literally the things that the material and the practices and the meditations, and the myth and the legend, and, and even the, the herbalism, things like that, naturally clicked into place with the experiences as I had them and as I was having them. And, when the right tool comes along for the right job, I'm going to set to it. And,
yeah.
I'm where I come from, I'm a priest and a bishop. So there isn't a rite I can't do for myself. If I feel like a mass, okay, look over my shoulder, I can go do one, right? Whether here or at the church or wherever, if there's something I wanted to do, I can go do that. And I love those things. Those things are a part of my, vocation, but they're also very formal. They're also sometimes, hands off in a way. And this, felt personal in a way where, there was a time where I was going to approach it from the perspective of the stole, the collar, right?
Yeah.
The priestly stole. But there was a raw sense that before I could get to the point where, I could put the stole and approach the altar with the mindset that does dignity, not only to the things that I'm approaching, but the perspective by which I'm approaching it, that there was a sense that I needed to roll my sleeves up first and put my hands in the earth.
Okay.
Not only the physical earth, but the my own earth, my own kind of prima materia, raw material, the lead of my own physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual being. And the OBOD material was an outlet to do that. And that's what I used it for. And and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm not spending a bucket on therapy today. So therapists are great. I had one when I was younger. I had one when I was older. you
Yeah.
know, and it's one of those things, like, you know, it's a good way to take a good look at yourself, and you know, it's that transmutation process, you know, from a secular perspective, though more and more they're embracing the spiritual perspective as well. But so, you know, so I've never been shy on going for that when I need it, right? I mean, you know, therapists have therapists, priests have priests, doctors have doctors, and, you know, teachers have mentors, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so there needs to be that recognition that, you know, when you're at a certain point, that you need to reach outside of yourself
That's right.
to be able to do this thing. I mean, this is why we have community, right? And and OBOD fit in that space very, very well. Not to say that the time before it was more abstract or more just a hobby or a curiosity, but
Mm-hmm.
for me, that's when it became, you know, fully experiential. That's when, I mean, the entire thing is designed around experience, which is one of the reasons why I love it. But when, you know, when experience and knowledge meets application,
Wonderful.
there,
Yeah.
there's something wonderful there. So yeah, so that allowed me to process grief, to also think about, you know, to think about their legacy, but also to think about my own a little bit, right? To think about the you know, the downline or the downstream from myself, beyond to family, to community, to
Mhm.
other people. It was you know, the ovate grade places you in context, and
Wonderful.
the experience of mortality places you in context, right? But the ovate grade has the ability to do that with story, and I think that makes those experiences easier to deal with.
Wonderful. Karen says, my thoughts exactly. Druidry has given me tools to deal with all sorts of emotional challenges. Yeah. And I think it's, you know, it's a spiritual development part, but it's also a personal one.
Yeah.
And it's a great set of resources to help
Yeah.
you navigate your way in the world. And it's just lovely to hear that. And you know, the idea of, you know, the world is, or life is giving you lead, and the OBOD is giving you a laboratory, you know, to convert that into gold. And that's quite poetic for someone who's a rambling poet who is very good. I just wanted to say that. It was beautifully put. And John King, who was a guest a few weeks ago. Hi, John. I've just finished the O8 and found it opened up and answered many questions for me. A wonderful opportunity. And Tina says it saved my life. So it's really interesting to people's, I'm always, you know, what an interesting journey it is for people. So for some religions, it's like, give your heart to Jesus, you're saved, and you're going to
Mhm.
go to heaven. And that's where it's at. And yet, when we look at the journey through the various grades and every, you know, whatever, what a journey and what a support, or it has provided people to answer questions, to prevent or present them with challenges and ways of managing it. You know, it never ceases to, I suppose, blow me away or surprise me. And yet I shouldn't be surprised, but I just love hearing how people have benefited from.
Well, there's an always new quality to it also. I think the you know, particularly, I mean, there's a saying that says, you know, the voyage of discovery is not about seeing new lands, but about having new eyes. And I think so. The you know, they're you know, encountering, and this is one of the reasons why, for example, you know, I try to participate occasionally on the, you know, the internal forum for the Guernsey, the Druid Grove. Hi, folks. Oh, I did say I was going to make a little shout out to. There's a couple folks on there, Wanderer, Leowen, and Druid Flower and whatnot. They've been very welcoming as I've posted over there
Okay.
and reading some of my stuff. And I promised I would give folks a shout out for folks going through the course. It's almost like an additional set of Guernsey. Listening to reading people's commentary and the way they practice gives you a whole new perspective uh,
Mm.
on the thing. So, you know, and because it's been around for so long, there's buckets and buckets of it, right? So for folks who haven't explored the OBOD forum, you should. There's lots of great stuff in there. But where was I going with that? Oh,
Well, I'm just going before you, just this David says, finding OBOD seems a reflection of my own soul's journey through stages of healing and the movement towards wholeness. Each phase took me into nature, church, recovery, community therapy, new thought, and now Druidry, which contains and combines the all. What I really like about OBOD. Great interview. Thank you, Jay. Well, I have a very good guest. And Andrew says, just restarting the course after being distracted by life and now seeing my local seed group is restarting monthly meetings. Such a blessing to get closer to nature and to reality. And Ava says, greetings from Wanderer. You must know her, do you?
Yeah, that was one of the folks that I was referring to.
Hi, Ava. I was in Germany recently, and Ava was there as well at OBOD International Gathering there. So it's yeah, I suppose I'm always blown away by people's different experience.
Yeah.
And you can I mean, so many of my guests have said, you know, I did the Bardic grade 3 times, or I did OBOD, or went through all 3 grades and I went back to the beginning again. And each time was a different experience. So yes, it's different eyes, maybe the same journey, but it's never the same. And I even know that with the Wheel of the Year, we do ceremonies. You know, you're given guidelines. You're given 8 rituals on the Bardic grade, and it doesn't. It could be exactly the same, but it's never the same because the people are different. The weather is different. Nature is different, and it's always a different experience. It's a bit like, you know, you have a cup of tea. You have a tea every morning, or your coffee. Yeah. You never go and say, God, I'm so bored. That tastes exactly like it did yesterday. It's because of whatever you're bringing to that cup of tea or cup of coffee, either the need for calming or being pepped up or comfort or a pause, whatever it is, that the experience of that cup is different each time you have it.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I reread books. I mean, they don't change. I change. So when you have you know, spiritual landmarks or time landmarks, and the Wheel of the Year and the liturgical calendar and all that stuff falls into all of the above, they allow you to measure change, right? They allow you to measure change, particularly within yourself, not just out within the world, but simply, you know, time over time. I mean, it's you know, from one feast to the next. I mean, it's also like a musical scale, right? I mean, it begins again, but on a higher or lower level.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
And so, yeah, it allows you to grow and develop and perceive change, particularly within yourself. And revisiting those things is necessary. I think one of the things that struck me, I was going to mention this earlier when talking about Gnosis, because I haven't mentioned Awen yet, and I see them as not quite the same, but pretty analogous. Yeah. I think they play in, or they lead into each other. But I mean, you look at the myth and story of Taliesin, and everybody kind of, you know, remembers the end result, right? It's the radiant brow and the, you know, triumphant bard and all this stuff. But the fundamental experience and all the transformations and all those things that give the story its meat happened well before Taliesin was ever Taliesin. It wasn't Taliesin who drank from the cauldron. It was Gwion. Yeah. You know, the kid, the punk, the person who just happened to be there at the right time, you know, for the right thing, right? I mean, that happened. You know, it kind of strikes me as before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. I mean, you know, he experienced, you know, his moment. He didn't magically become Taliesin at that moment. He became Taliesin because he did something with what he experienced.
Right. Yes.
And so all those things, the transformations, the evolution, the chase, all those things, you know, happen not to some evolved human being or spiritual being further down in the line, but, you know, a regular, ordinary, ignorant, you know, all those things, a regular, ordinary person kind of reconciling and working and doing those things. And I imagine that, you know, when Gwion becomes Taliesin and looks back at the thing, that there's something that, you know, he can glean from his own story and those own stages, even though he was there, even though he went through it, right? So I think if you revisit it, much in the same way as the Wheel of the Year or the other myths, if you revisit the material, if you revisit the stories, if you revisit the work, you're going to transmute a lot more into gold than by one pass alone, right? Because it might not change, but you change. So.
Yes, beautiful. So, this is a question I ask people: what has been your greatest achievement, or what are you most proud of?
Well, I mean, I'm always the most proud of the people around me, the communities I participate in, and not simply by the virtue that I participate in them or lead them. That I've played a part, small or large. I mean, it depends, where I'm at and who I'm talking to. That I've played some part in making people welcome. I mean, one of the reasons why I became a priest is. I mentioned I've been playing guitar for a while. So when I was a teenager, I played in a band. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I kind of put the sex and the drugs ahead of the rock and roll, so I didn't get famous. And but what I did get was a mental health crisis or two.
Okay.
Because of the drugs. And while I wasn't alone in that time, because I have great family and I have great friends. I mean, my mom is a superhero, and and Andy was fantastic, and I've still got friends from all the way before the time where I was a priest, where they just knew me as a punk and a troublemaker or whatever.
Okay.
I still hang out with some of those folks. And so I was never alone. But when you deal with anxiety and depression, you're dealing with perception and reality not lining up. And when you're depressed, when you're depressed, when your mood is low, your memory tends to narrow, and you tend to lose sight. You tend to lose sight of the positives. Have an awareness of your, you get tunnel vision about your mood and any number of things, right? Where you may not actually be alone, but that's not what it feels like.
No.
And functionally it becomes it becomes its own reality, and self-fulfilling at that, if not looked after. And so coming out of that experience, right, I said, well, how do I make it less likely that somebody else is going to encounter that kind of thing? Well, I have a tremor, so I'm not steady enough to, be a doctor. I'm going to, poke somebody's eye out or something by accident, or, chop off a finger, or God knows what. I'm not patient enough to be a teacher, because after all, I was once a kid and went to school, and I know what I was like. There's no way I could do that. But spirituality had been a constant companion. I can listen to people. I can accompany people.
Okay.
And so I resolved to create communities where people were welcome, regardless of where they were coming from or what they were feeling. And so the ability, to bring it back to your question, the ability to participate, facilitate, or add a force multiplier to communities who have that kind of thing at their heart, whether it be the AJC or OBOD, is probably the thing that, in terms of spirituality, I'm the most proud of, because it's got to do something, right? If your spirituality doesn't inspire transformation for yourself or for others or for the world, if it doesn't make a meaningful difference beyond a fantasy in your head, or the external beyond your nose, then what's it good for, right? You have to be able to do something with it. And so I've been very proud to participate in communities that have that very kind of grounded, down to earth, people-centered approach. And the people are a hell of a blessing. They're fantastic.
Wonderful. Tina says, I can't believe you were ever a troublemaker. So
there are pictures.
So I suppose the biggest challenge you've overcome, has that been, the troublemaking, the drugs, and all of that in your early life, or have you had? And how did you overcome that?
Well, the biggest challenge to overcome hasn't been overcome yet.
Oh, okay.
The biggest challenge to overcome is, of course, myself, and there's still plenty of time in my own life to get in my own way, right? I will know if I've won that battle by the time I reach the end of my days. So far I've got a series of small but significant victories. So I mean, the ultimate battle is staying out of my own way, is remembering to listen and to accompany, rather than advise or command. And I mean, I, like many other people, are potentially my own worst enemy. So I view that as a long-term thing. In terms of in terms of challenges already to overcome, or that I've already overcome, I would say, yeah, winning the long-term struggle against my own mood, against my own anxiety. I mean, there are still moments, of course, where it comes up, but I mean, this is why you have tools. This is why you have things in place. So so that war is won, and now it's just little day-to-day skirmishes with the things that annoy me and piss me off, including myself, especially myself.
Yes, it's good to recognize that sometimes you can be your own worst enemy rather than it out there, somebody out there. And if you are your own enemy, then you can change it.
Yeah.
You have agency to be able to deal with it and make the enemy part of you your friend. What's the most reckless thing you've done?
Most reckless thing I've done?
Yeah.
Oh God. Lordy.
That you'd like to share.
Well, I have my mom on Facebook, and I had mentioned to a few folks that that I was going to be doing this, and I'm pretty sure she saw that post. So I don't know if she's watching this or not. She already knows most of it. See, I grew up with one of the reasons why my trouble times were extra fun is because my mom worked all her life as a social worker.
Okay.
And so the fact that her kid was a troublemaker,
so you got to test her on that one. Well done.
Was a potential thing. But yeah, I mean, there were a couple moments where I did some incredibly dumb things. Like I thought I would, race a train, across the tracks, that type of thing.
Running across it, not alongside it.
No, not alongside it. Are you kidding? I've always been too chubby for that. But beating it across the tracks, that was a lot closer than that. That was. I mean, I'll put it this way: I could feel the heat of the light on the side of my face.
Oh, cripes.
And
how many times did you do that? Once?
Yeah, I think I was 17 at the time. Yeah,
and you did it once.
Once.
Okay.
Because by the time I got over to my friend's place, that's where I was going to crash, I was 17 at the time. When we got in the door, we got our shoes off and our jackets off, and everybody else had gone downstairs to the rec room. My buddy had pulled me aside to talk to me about it. Only there weren't necessarily a lot of words. He grabbed me by the front of my shirt, put me up against the wall, and basically said with a lot of 4-letter words, "If you ever do that again, if you survive, I will kill you myself."
Okay.
So apparently it was a lot closer than I realized, but I was also inebriated at the time. So.
Oh, cripes.
So you asked for reckless, you got it. I mean, I'm not even sure.
Someone who's looking after you, your friend, and
Yeah. So I'm not even sure the church folks know that story, but now everybody does. So there you go. Kids do stupid things, and I have been, over the course of my life, both a kid and stupid. So there you are. That's probably one of the most reckless things I've ever done.
Well, at 17, I was so cautious. There's no way I'd have anything like that. I did not take risks like that. I've done reckless things. Well, that worked out weren't reckless, that to other people were, but not to me. But and I envy, I look back, I envy wild people who were wilder when they were younger, because I wasn't.
Well, it only sounds fun in retrospect. It's one of those things that I think, you look back and you go, whatever, but contextually, it's just a terrible thing. I was going to say, have you ever considered flipping the camera around and doing being interviewed for a Fireside Chat.
Oh, I
think
have.
Yeah.
I have. I think it's chat 12 and 13 where Pat Booker chats to me.
Oh,
That's
well,
two.
then I will have to go back and do it, say, because I've watched about a dozen of them, but not every one of them, and not always in order. Because I was going to say, because that would be a question I would love to see asked. So.
Actually, Pat never asked me that question, but I talked about it at the last chat.
Nice.
Anyway, yeah. So, do you have any regrets?
I think I would say no. I would say in terms of regrets, about the most I could say is I regret not doing everything I've done sooner.
Yeah.
Right. But I realized that probably wouldn't have quite have made things turn out the way they have. Right. Because for the pain and the difficulty and struggle and various other low points, right, the high points have been fantastic. And and the pain and struggle and all that other kind of stuff is nothing beyond the human. You live long enough on this earth, and you're going to experience a version of it in your own context. So there's no way to avoid that at all whatsoever. So I think I think for me, I would just do a lot of the positive things I've done earlier. Being a priest, I don't think I could have been a priest any younger. I probably could have started playing guitar earlier or writing earlier. Joining OBOD, I could have stood to do that earlier, but I also think it came at the right time for the reasons I've mentioned. So no, I don't think I have any regrets.
That's wonderful. What are you grateful for?
Oh, people, hands down. People, always the experience of people, encountering people. It's just the variety, the depth, the humanity, the sincerity of the people that I encounter in every context, from the folks on the OBOD forum to watching these chats and the teas, our conversation, the folks in my parish. It's just it seems inexhaustible. And which is good, because comparatively, I think sometimes my own ignorance is inexhaustible. My own short-sightedness can be inexhaustible. My own frustration can be inexhaustible. I mean, there's a thing about Buddhism where they were talking about, there are as many gates to enlightenment as there are people. And I think that I think my encounter, for as many obstacles that I encounter or create or put in my own way, there are encounters with people that help me contextualize, understand, and resolve those things. I have the ability to not only encounter a bit or an aspect or a context of the divine that I haven't experienced previously in the faces of other human beings. I also get to encounter myself a little bit more, right? One of my stoner friends from way back in the day, and I'm pretty sure he ripped this off from somebody else, but I remember it coming from his lips. He said, learn from other people's mistakes, because you won't live long enough to learn from your own. And I think if you stretch that out a little bit more, learn from their successes, learn from their blessings, learn from their obstacles, because you won't live long enough to appreciate all of your own. So I think every time I encounter people, it is surprising, it is enriching, it is reinvigorating. And I say that as a naturally introverted person, who needs quiet time with a book. That there's never a time where, there'll be plenty of times where it's like, okay, I need to get out of here and have a coffee and lay on my couch, but I'm taking something home with me. I might be tired, but I'm not burnt out. I'm not whatever. There's a thing that comes with me when I do that, and so I think the experience of people and community is the thing I'm most grateful for.
Oh, beautiful. So we're coming close to the end of our time, but I've just well, Lisa says, oh yes, I stopped going up on the roof when my friend fell off hers. Oh. She lived. This is Lisa, the reckless thing. I'm glad she lived, Lisa, and you're still here too. That's wonderful. One concern you have about the modern world, or what concerns you about the modern world?
What doesn't concern me? Well, I try not to, because in my role in my other universe, I'm officially apolitical. I tend to view my role as kind of being analogous to the Queen. I have no public opinions. For good reason, because I think people tend to identify, interchangeably or mutually, they tend to identify the leader in the organization, right? And sometimes that's good. It's good. It's a good
Mhm.
leader. It's bad if it's a bad leader. And sometimes people will always put their expectations, their hopes, their dreams, their successes, and their failures on you, right?
Mhm.
And that can be a pretty, challenging thing. So I try not to assist them in that projection by giving them a screen to necessarily project on, right? So I try to reduce that surface area. It can be pretty difficult, because sometimes that means, I have to take a back seat, but that's fine. But so I'm not going to comment on the state of the, political or social world. I guess the thing that I think the thing that concerns me the most is that and this is exacerbated by things like COVID, is that the kind of isolation that we experience as human beings is kind of given shape and form and face, and even a scapegoat by
Mhm.
by by COVID. But I think all those things were present more. They're just exacerbated. I think we're becoming disconnected from each other, and I think there is a process, and we do this all the time. Discernment and judgment are how we survive. It's how we cross the road without getting hit or
Yeah.
getting whacked by a train. But so some of those things are necessary, but at the same time, when we make those hard, fast, quick judgments, when we use labels, when we do those things, there is a process that snowballs, where we risk making the other, right?
Yeah.
Where we risk treating people as the other, where there
Yeah.
where there's a where we dehumanize, where we disconnect, where we objectify, right? Where we forget the things that connect one another, and when that happens, we begin to talk and think and do horrible things towards
Yeah.
each other. And so I think connecting, having the human experience, breaking bread, sharing poetry,
Mhm.
art, connecting, hearing each other, in each other's own context, in language, and not simply through our own lens. I think we need antidotes to disconnection, to isolation. Because I think we're headed into a period of that, and COVID has made it worse, but it's also made an excuse for what I
Mhm.
think is the current tendency of the world. And so I think we need to counterweight that a bit. I think folks need to reach out to other people, whether it's how are you doing? Is there anything you need? Just simple stuff. I mean, one of the reasons why I consider myself a Johannite Gnostic is the fundamental. And I'm not big on the thing of the crucifixion, right? For Gnostics, the incarnation is the thing, right? The crucifixion is an unfortunate event from which we can learn from, but we're not saved because of Jesus' death. That's not our thing. That said, there's still a lesson in that story, in the sense that John followed Christ at the cross and stayed by him as he went through his thing. He couldn't take him down. He couldn't ease his journey. He couldn't do anything except for be there. That's the idea of a ministry of presence or accompaniment. I think we need to do that for each other, as people go through their things, so that they know they're not alone. That's the thing that concerns me.
I love that. I mean, that reminder of John not being able to take him off the cross, but being
Yeah,
with him. And I think being able to be with people in their pain, in their grief, in their
yeah,
torment, when you cannot do anything. Because so often,
yeah,
I think the modern world gives us, prior to COVID, I think this notion that we're in control of things and that there's a remedy for all ills. And
yeah.
sometimes just about staying with and being with and accompanying. And that can be the greatest gift that you can find. And it's really interesting, that your church or your spirituality comes from that story,
Yeah.
that accompanying.
It's a very basic image. I was going to say fundamental, but I don't like the word fundamental, because then it connects to
Yes,
fundamentalism. But
yeah.
it is an essential image, and I think that's one of the things that we sometimes we tend to overlook the simple in favor of the complex. And and that because it's simple, we dismiss it. But people need that kind of companionship, that kind of accompaniment, right? If it needs to be more complex, if it's more complicated, let them bring that to the table. Just offer what you're able, and scale up or down as needed. But the idea, some people say, well, what could I possibly do, or what could I possibly offer? That's crap. Put it out there. Just say, what do you need, or how can I help? Right?
Asking that can be really important. Mary Lane from the Netherlands, holding space. Lisa says B, holding space for others while they allow their grief to surface to be healed. Yeah, that's from Hi Trudy from Australia. What does Lisa say? Interesting, because she says, I look at online chats as a big party line. It does help. I was caring for a cancer patient, so couldn't afford to get COVID. So it's a big deal now to go on a plane. Okay. So what gives you hope then?
Well, one thing I was going to, sorry, that reminded me of a thought. The thing I was going to mention that's kind of aligned to OBOD is there's the story of the Grail and the Fisher King and Percival, right? The simpleton who finds the Grail. And I mean, as they tell you often, I mean, the definition for trauma is that it's a wound. And
yes.
the Fisher King Amfortas, experiences a wound, a literal physical trauma. And the solution to that trauma, is the simple question of what ails thee, right? Percival, that Percival in time asks that simple question to, not what's wrong with you or what did you do, but what happened, right? How can I help? And I think it is that simple, and I think we complicate it. Sorry, the question was about hope.
Yeah.
What's my biggest hope? Oh, I don't actually know. I don't. I think I mean, my mundane hopes are to win the lottery, and
Okay.
retire to some rocky island with temperatures in the single digits.
My question's about hope for them, about the world.
Oh, about the world. Well, I think I would connect it to the concerns.
Yeah.
That that the hope is that I think we.
What gives you hope about the world? Not what do you hope, but what gives you?
Okay. What gives me hope is, well, conversations like this, communities like this, environments like this, where where people are willing to have frank discussions, to be both serious and light, as it's called for, to kind of offer up their difficulties, to shoulder the difficulties for other people. It's stuff like this that gives me hope. I think if people keep doing this, right, if they remember to offer this for another, I think we'll be fine. It's a little bit for humanity. It's a little bit like overcoming amnesia. It needs a little bit of work, but I think every time people do something like this, we're on the right track.
Okay, thank you for saying that. So, before we end, would you like to share your second poem?
Sure. Once again, with my boring titles, just a sec here. My Mac is reminding me I need to update it. It's very old. What I need to do is throw it out a window. Okay, there we go. This one I just called Navigation. This is the one that I had penned kind of when I, felt, not that I myself was at a nexus point of folks' COVID struggles, but just simply kind of witnessing it all kind of come together and come apart. And so I had penned this for that kind of purpose, and perhaps a bit for myself as well. It's called Navigation. The nostalgia of the past can instill an unattainable longing for that which never was. And the future can trim the horizon in an unquenchable anxiety for the things which never may be. But between these points, the present can feel at times so far out from shore from which you pushed off, and so distant from the one in which you may arrive, that you can't see land in any direction from where you are. Lacking a landmark, it is easy to get lost, or worse, to go under in the depth of the now, to be disorientated in a seemingly endless expanse. This, I find, is where, like those who sailed out many ages ago, we must orientate ourselves by the stars in order to press on. But rather than the whirling gears of skyward machinery measured out in a myriad points of light, these stars and constellations are treasures of poetry, music, art, scripture, story, the beauty of nature, the gaze of your partner, your friend, or your animal companion. The past is ever receding, and the future only ever arrives in passing. So sometimes the best anchor, guide, and course for these disorientating moments are those things that allow us to glimpse the eternal, a refuge and respite in timelessness, rather than a race towards any given time. Take a moment outside of time when you need it. Get your bearings, shore up your sea legs, and a sense of adventure, and press on, and take that treasure with you.
Oh, lovely. Beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. So my final question, you've already said your favorite season is the fall. Do you have a favorite festival?
Oh, that would in the Wheel of the Year.
Yeah.
That would be easy. That would be Samhain.
Most people say Samhain.
Right. I mean, I mean, it's just it's spooky. It feels great, but also, as I'm, in the heartland of my middle age, and particularly, as I watch my own health, change and grow, and I encounter that experience in others, both from a vocational perspective, but also in family and friends. That every year when I arrive at that time, there's that whole thing around Hallowtide where you have Halloween, All Souls, All Saints, that whole thing where it's I mean, as well as the concept of the thinning of the veil, it's just rich with memory and reconnection, right? I mean, the thing that makes the ground fertile is the decomposition, right?
That's right.
The leaves that fall from the tree.
Yeah.
And there's so much growth and so much depth and so much richness in that time that you can reflect and you can kind of plant for the year ahead.
Beautiful. So Cliff says, a brilliant, blessed interview. As I listen, a humorous thought came to mind. I wonder if Shaun ever gets tempted to call the quarters and also call for peace during his service to the congregation.
Well, funny you should mention that. Because there's some overlaps, and this could be a whole other call where we talk about the overlapping history between the independent churches and Druidry since the 18th century. A lot of the original neo-Druidic modern revival lodges were started by Christians, and so they involved quarters involving archangels, right? And our mass begins with the archangels. I actually wrote that down, so I guess that's what I'll cap with, because our mass actually does involve the quarters. Here's what they are. It'll take 2 seconds. Hail Raphael, ruler of air, divine physician. As the breath of the divine moves over the face of the deep, so do we call upon you to move over the sanctuary of our being, giving voice to our prayer and strength to our journey. Lord of wind and storm, we invoke thee. This is from our mass. Hail Michael, ruler of fire, divine guardian. As a pillar of fire guided our ancestors through darkness, so do we call upon you to light our path through the wilderness of ignorance into the kingdom of heaven. Lord of flame and prince of the seraphim, we invoke thee. Hail Gabriel, ruler of water, divine messenger. As your presence foretold the incarnation to Mary, our mother, so do we call upon you to help us know ourselves as children of the divine beloved. Lord of stream and ocean, we invoke thee. Hail Uriel, ruler of earth, divine companion. As you stand guarding the gates of paradise, so do we call upon you to guide us at our last through the portal of that undiscovered country from which no traveler returns. Lord of stone and veil, we invoke thee. Almost all of our rituals start with that.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Just lovely. I mean, just wonderful resonances. Thank you. And I mean, so many beautiful existential poem, beautiful poem. I needed that. Beautiful, really resonated with me. Beautiful, powerful metaphor. Very insightful conversation tonight. Thank you both. Thank you for most interesting discussion. It's poignant. We just lost. Okay. Okay. Wait a second. The Kate Bush song Lily uses the angels in the directions. It's based on the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram.
Nice.
Excellent. And thank you, Shaun. So it's awesome calling the elements in your rituals. So lots of beautiful comments here from people. So we've hit the 2-hour mark, and it's time to say good night or good morning, good afternoon. It's what time is it with you?
3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's been such a joy talking to you, and a really, really interesting conversation. And of course, we could go on and on and on, as is always the case, which is actually lovely that we end on a high note, not when we're bored out of our trees, and it hasn't happened yet. So it's just lovely that these conversations can go on.
I wouldn't want to break the winning streak. So the ones that I've been able to watch have been fantastic.
Okay. So would you say goodbye, and then I'll send you through the veil, and then we can look at the comments afterwards.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a fantastic evening, morning, afternoon, and week, and of course, the Blessed Lammas when it comes around.
Okay. So don't you don't go away, but I'll just send you across. Okay. So listen, thank you all for being here this evening and for your wonderful comments. And again, I know there were some flying through that I didn't get to read out, and I'm sorry about that. But I always appreciate how active an audience you are. I am taking a break for the summer, so my next Fireside Chat will be in September, and I'm just checking my date. So it will be the 8th of September. So I am looking forward to having a rest over the summer, and see you then. And I'm sure there's plenty of you haven't watched all of them anyway. There's plenty to look at, as this is our 86th. So I look forward to seeing you in September with another season of amazing guests. We are so blessed to have such members in the order to be able to have these wonderful conversations. And for that, I am really, really grateful. And I'm also very, very grateful for you, that you contribute so much to these conversations and make them relevant. So with your wonderful contributions. So until then, I say good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. And slán go fóill until I meet you in September. Okay? Bye-bye. Be well. And blessings. I forgot to say. So on the 30th of July, we will be having our orders online ceremony. I will be here for that. So, yes. So until then, slán go fóill. Bye-bye.